Welcome back to the podcast, guys. This is one I'm really excited about because this really pertains to the way that I love to train, the way that I program a lot of the training for my clients. I work with, a lot of guys that do high rocks, guys that do half marathons, full marathons, guys that do Ironman competitions, triathlons. And, with that comes balancing intensity, balancing volume, just balancing our cardio with our lifting. And that's what this episode is really going to be all about. And I'm excited because not only does this pertain to those individuals and even people like myself who like to compete in some of those competitions, but really just everyday people who enjoy lifting and running and conditioning alongside it. And it is a very awesome approach. There's so many amazing benefits to having both as part of our basically training regimen, which I'm going to dive into today. But the whole purpose of this episode is just to really break down, some of the lessons that I've learned coaching these types of individuals that train in this way, lessons that I've learned along the way. Because with a lot of these things that you guys will notice, I have had to fail to learn these lessons and extrapolate the lesson from that failure to then be able to teach you guys, how to do it the right way. And I think that that's what's going to be so cool about this episode is you guys are going to get kind of a sneak peek into a lot of how I train, how I program, how I balance everything that I do in the gym, outside the gym, same thing with my clients. And you guys are going to be able to extrapolate a lot of useful information from this to take with you into your own training and how you balance your lifting with your running and conditioning. So, to kind of open this thing up, I wanted to kind of go back to, my history of being an athlete. I think a lot of you guys know that, I played Division I football for Ohio State. I've really been more of a shorter distance, more explosive based athlete my whole life. So, I've never really, especially earlier days and when I was younger, I never really did a whole lot of like distance running. When I, began playing lacrosse, we did do more distance. I wasn't more of a defenseman. The midfielders tend to run a little bit more. So I wasn't running as much as those guys, but, running was still very much so part of the sport of lacrosse. So I think like the most I ever ran during that time period, like consecutively, not counting like games and practice, was like 3 miles. We did like a 3-mile run in the off season. And I remember that was like the longest distance that I had ran pretty much in my life up until literally recently when I started getting into this longer distance running. And I used to be the guy, I'm telling you guys straight up, like I used to be the guy that said, I hate running. I said that before, word for word. I was one of those people. And honestly, the reason I said that, like the truth is, I really just wasn't good at it. And I didn't know how to regress it to a level that I could actually handle sustainably for where I was at with my body, my past, how I felt currently, all of those details. And so I just had that limiting belief early on where, running was something I hated just because I didn't know how to do it sustainably. And I really didn't know how to regress my training to a level where, I could lower that barrier of entry and basically get started and get going. So it's really ironic how I kind of stumbled into more of this distance running. And so I remember around like last winter, I was really, maybe even 2 winters ago, I was struggling with activity. During the winter in the Midwest, it's really hard to move your body. In a lot of ways, we're just isolated at home indoors for majority of the time. And I wanted to utilize some low intensity running on the treadmill just to get my volume of activity higher during those less active weeks and months and days. And so something that I did was basically just really easy running and walking intervals. So like I didn't even just get on that treadmill and start running. I literally started out with doing like 6 rounds of 1 minute of walking, 1 minute of jogging, 1 minute of walking, 1 minute of jogging. Did that for like 6 rounds, 12 minutes total. And that is literally what ended up lowering that barrier of entry because I was able to see what was possible. I was able to see, maybe I am able to run more so than I thought I could in the past. And, once again, it was just that limiting belief that was holding me back, and exposing myself to a regressed version of running lowered that barrier of entry and got me into the practice and got me ultimately to where I am today, where I'm running, 6, 7 consecutive miles. I've done multiple half marathons in the last year. I've done high rocks twice. So all of that is a byproduct of lowering that barrier of entry. And I think that gaining that evidence is just so crucial. So, when we are, working through trying to get into some form of activity, especially like beginners in the gym, trying to get consistent again, I think the most beneficial thing that individuals can experience is gaining evidence behind the actions or inputs that they're putting forth. And so what I mean by that is, when I do X, I get Y evidence in return. Like I'm seeing that, by me doing this, I am able, to get this evidence and reinforce that action at the end of the day. And this was kind of one of those moments for me where, lowering that barrier of entry gave me the evidence like maybe I can be a runner, maybe I can do a little bit more than this if I just progress from this regression. And I think that that's so important because a lot of people look at, these activities like running or certain lifting, and feel intimidated or feel like, that could never be me or how could I ever do that? And a valuable lesson I've learned as a coach is that the difference in you being able to do those things and not oftentimes comes down to something as simple as knowing how to regress the exercise or the medium you're trying to get good at to a level that you can absolutely do right now, which is what I did with the running, with the 1 minute of running, 1 minute of walking intervals. That lowered that barrier of entry for me. And it really helped me see what was possible. And I think that that is crucial. And that's why I'm such a firm believer that following a structured plan towards your health and fitness can literally make or break motivation. And I talk about this a lot, but I think that, randomness in the gym, kind of doing whatever you feel like it has its place. And I think that a lot of beginners, like getting into the gym for the first time, like it's good to just kind of experiment, try different things, play around with this type of lifting or, that type of lifting. Like, there's going to be some initial randomness at the end of the day. Like, especially if we're trying to get into something new, there's not going to be a whole lot of structure. I would even encourage just start, like just get in without the structure. But as you progress, as you get deeper into this journey and in your fitness journey, you will inevitably reach a point where a plateau hits. And this is actually like kind of the main type of client that I work with are advanced individuals. Like while it tends to be like, individuals that are former athletes, high performers, hybrid athletes, everyday people who love to get after it. At the end of the day, who I really work with are people who have been doing this a long time. They're advanced trainees and they hit that plateau and they don't have the answers to take them to that next step. And I know a lot of us, especially as high performers, we are constantly looking to improve and get better. And we do not like maintenance and plateaus. And so I find that having a plan, having an approach guarantees that you break through those plateaus. And this is why I always say, like, at some point or another, there will be a need for a plan or some type of structure to keep you progressing and keep you going. Because I think a lot of people lose motivation in the gym because they don't have that evidence reinforcing the action that they're taking. And then they're just like, why am I doing this in the first place? When if you have a plan, if you're following a structured plan and approach towards your training, you are intentionally doing these different things that we know are stacking up and compounding over time. And then over time, we're actually gaining evidence that what we're doing is working for us. And then it becomes addictive. Like it's almost like, okay, I'm ready for the next thing. If I could accomplish all of this, I can't even imagine where I could be if I just keep going. And that's why I'm so passionate about following a plan and why, sometimes online I'm like, you need to be following a plan at some point if you hit that plateau. Because again, I just feel like a lot of people, and I see this with a lot of the former athletes that I work with, where, they get done playing and then it just turns into random fitness, like for good. Like kind of like random unstructured training, like from that point on. But a lot of these guys deep down want to be progressing. They want to be getting better. They want to be improving their strength, their muscle, their performance, their body composition. They want to keep achieving and keep progressing. And I find that having a plan, having a structure in place guarantees that progression because we can make small pivots or small changes if things aren't working, and then we can lean into things that are working. And then we know and we have confidence that our efforts are compounding over time. And I think that just this whole topic of regression progression that I'm talking about is so vital because I learned it training my 67, 68-year-old parents, when they were trying to get in to their fitness routine and get into a consistent rhythm with lifting weights. I lowered that barrier of entry for them. I didn't throw, exercises that I'm doing with my advanced clients at my parents and had the black and white mentality that like, oh, this person has to do the same thing as this person. I very much so individualized based on the individual. And so for my parents, I was able to choose exercises. So I essentially just chose exercises and selected exercises that they 100% could do very well. And then we started there at the foundational level, and then we slowly progressed from there. Me helping clients, get back into running, get back into athletic movement. That takes a lot of regression to where they're at and prove to them, hey, I can do this still, just at like a regressed version or using variations that, maybe are a little bit easier for my body that I can lower that barrier of entry with, build momentum, and then stack up evidence and reinforcement that, hey, I can do this. I can even handle more. And then we progress from there. That's why progressive overload is so underrated, because it's highly motivating. If our workouts are random, it gets really unmotivating really quickly, because we don't have that evidence and that feedback loop that what we're doing is actually working for us and pushing us closer toward our goals. We almost feel like we're just running in quicksand, and you can see how that would become really demotivating if all you're doing in the gym is just constant random stuff. You're never really allowing your body the chance to adapt and actually progress over time. And so I think a huge piece to this conversation that is so important, and this is something I've had to learn through experience, through literally repetition and just doing it, is how to balance your load and the weight that you're using, the intensity and the just intentionality that we're bringing behind the lifting and the running. And something that is just really underrated that I don't think a lot of people talk about is, as you become more advanced in this game, as you become more advanced in your fitness, you're going to be able to train harder. And with that is going to require more discipline for recovery and regulating that high intensity training. And I see this a lot with the advanced individuals that I work with, where, as you get deeper into this fitness journey and you become more advanced, that intensity is going to climb. You're going to be able to lift more weight. You're going to be able to handle more mileage outside, or, on a treadmill, wherever you're running. You're going to be able to handle more the more advanced you get. And the trap that a lot of guys, especially men, fall into is that high intensity training becomes our default. This happened to me, and I'm going to talk about this later in the episode, but we get so focused, and honestly, it's a lot of the marketing and messaging and framing that we've been conditioned to believe in fitness, where it's like more intensity equals better results, more progress. And that's not the case. We have to be able to recover from that intensity. And that's what people don't talk about. We're getting the gains from that intense exercise in the recovery, not during the session. When our body recovers and adapts, that's where we're gaining the benefit. So if we're negating that recovery, that activity that we're doing can become counterproductive. So that's why we have to be balancing recovery with high intensity training. And what I recommend to a lot of my guys that I coach, and what I help them basically discover through their process, is that, low to moderate intensity really should be our norm. Most of our training should fall under that low to moderate intensity. And then some of our training, very strategically, should we spike into that high intensity. But what ends up happening is that high intensity becomes the default for most guys. And then that's where we have challenges, especially as we age and we're balancing stress, life stress, work stress. Then that training stress of high intensity compounds on top of that life stress and that work stress. And then we're even more stressed. And it's just stuff that we don't think about. We equate high intensity training to stress relief. Yes, that might feel that way, but without even realizing it, we are adding and accumulating more physiological stress through high intensity training. So I think getting to a place where you can learn how to intentionally balance your low, moderate, high intensity training is absolutely pivotal. And also understanding, during a super stressful day, during a super stressful week where, recovery is struggling, work is, really, really challenging us, during a day or a week like that, might be smarter to regress and go lower intensity and do something over nothing versus powering through, adding more gasoline on the fire with high intensity training with an already high stress day or week. That's where we can get into trouble. And that's why regulating intensity is so crucial. And so, when it comes to kind of balancing that intensity, I think it's just important to separate the days, or separate the intent on those given sessions or days. And I can kind of break this down in how I train right now. So how I work out right now and how my training sessions are built, or how my weeks of training are built, I have 3 full body, strength-based, more muscle-based sessions where I'm doing, power, strength, hypertrophy, really more lifting focused on those 3 full body days. And then I have 2 separate days that are my conditioning days. One day is a higher intensity day. That's where I've been placing a lot of my high rock simulated training. And then I have a lower intensity conditioning day. That's where I do my zone 2 long run. A really easy way to pivot based on what I'm talking about with the stress ramifications is just I could easily create or regress that high rocks specific conditioning. I can easily regress that and make it lower intensity. So say it is a really stressful week and I have to make that aerobic versus anaerobic because the high intensity training is going to be harder to recover from than the low intensity training. The low intensity training is going to be easier to recover from. And that's kind of how you guys want to think about it. The harder and the higher intensity, the harder you go in the gym and the higher intensity that you train at, the harder your body is ultimately going to struggle to recover. So like your body's just really going to struggle to recover from that high intensity training. But our body is going to have a much easier time recovering from that lower intensity training. That's why low intensity training is such a cheat code. That's why steps, zone 2 aerobic runs or bike rides are really beneficial and really popular, because we're essentially still doing something. We're still doing activity. We're still getting those health benefits. We're still getting caloric expenditure from those activities instead of being sedentary, but we're not accumulating excess stress on the body, which we know can be a bad thing if it goes unregulated. And so I think also it's just important to talk about separating, between the lifting and conditioning on different days or within the same day. So if you're somebody that has worked with me or you've done any of my programs, you know that I'm a big fan of combining our lifting with our conditioning. Even in some of my 4-day upper lower split programs, I like to have 2 upper lower strength and conditioning days that are, more lower volume, heavier load, as well as a conditioning piece with that. And then 2 days on the back end of the week that are upper lower, more muscle focused hypertrophy days. And then we can use, a 5th day as kind of another conditioning day. That could be our low intensity conditioning. That's a format I absolutely love. So essentially there really is 2 formats. And I'm not, as you guys know, I'm not very black and white with health and fitness, because there are just so many it depends type situations in this field. But when it comes to training splits, in my 5 years, going on 6 years doing this, I've really siloed into 2 main splits that I absolutely love. And the one is the one that I just described, which is the 4-day upper lower split, usually with a 5th day of low intensity conditioning mixed in. So you've got your 2 upper lower strength and conditioning days. Then you've got your 2 more muscle focused hypertrophy days, and then our 1 conditioning day. Nice 5-day split, 2 recovery days. We can also use those, when needed throughout those 5 days. We got 7 days to do those 5 workouts. And then on the flip side, the other structure that I really like and the other split that I like is doing 3 full body lifts and then separating the conditioning from that and utilizing, 1 to 2, maybe 3 max conditioning days on top of those 3 full body days. And I just find that when you condense into that 3-day full body split, it frees up, more of those days for conditioning. And it's just a little bit more efficient way to train. Cause when you guys think about it, when you're doing 3 full body days, you're essentially training every muscle 3 times per week versus say the upper lower split, where the slight pitfall is you're getting that 2-time frequency. So you're training upper and lower body 2 times with the 4-day split. You're training your every single muscle 3 times a week with the 3-day full body split. That's why a lot of people love that style. That's why I love that style, because it's a little bit more efficient. We're able to get a little bit more frequency with less. And it's a nice way for separating the conditioning, especially for hybrid athletes or people who are doing just higher volume running alongside their lifting. Now, you can, do some of that running in the same day as the lifting. It would be beneficial to potentially separate those sessions. If you have to do them together, you just really have to be cautious of what that stress ramification is for that amount of activity and that amount of just intensity on the body, and if you can recover from that. And so I just think it's really important to focus on what we can recover from, and being very strategic on where we're weaving that conditioning in. So I find, for me personally, the 3 full body days and the 2 conditioning days are money, because I'm able to, through my 7 days, kind of select, which days I'm doing those activities based on fatigue, stress levels, how I've recovered, all of those variables. And so I really like that. I'm also able to kind of mentally separate, okay, when it's my run, my long run, all I have to worry about and focus on is just crushing that run. When it's my high rocks conditioning, all I have to focus on is that high rocks conditioning. So you guys are kind of seeing why both of these splits make sense. That style that I talked about with the 4-day upper lower split, you're on those strength conditioning days. It's not super long conditioning. That is going to be more anaerobic, more moderate intense to high intense on those conditioning days. And they're going to be shorter format. So, with the lifting, it's going to be anywhere between a 10 to 20 minute conditioning piece versus spending 30 to 60 minutes on a separate day, say on the 3-day split, for that conditioning separate. So again, both of those splits absolutely money. I use both of those splits with my clients, and they're highly effective. And a lot of it just comes down to time constraints, what you guys have the ability to input and put forth with your schedule, with your day to day, with your week, and with just the overall stress load. Like, what can you actually recover from? And I think that's where a lot of hybrid athletes go wrong, is they're overtraining without realizing it, and they're not even aware that their body's struggling to recover and that they're not recovering. So it's something to be very aware of as you guys are navigating more intensity, as you become more advanced, as you're lifting heavier weights, as you're running higher volumes. You're gonna have to recover smarter. And that's something that I've learned the hard way, because I've gone there. I've done too much. I have plenty of personal lessons where I overshot and did the absolute most and learned from it. And, I think sometimes the only way to learn these things is through failing, is through making the mistake and then extrapolating the lesson. Kind of like I said in the beginning of the episode, we have to essentially, the only way is through. Like, in a lot of ways, some of these things we do have to learn through failing. And then we can take that lesson that we learned, use it to our benefit, and keep progressing forward. And so, for a lot of you guys out there, you probably like me, where, you're pretty stubborn and you might have to, fail yourself, to learn some of these things that I'm going to talk about. But I hope that you can take these hard lessons that I've learned and implement them into your training so that you can avoid some of these mistakes that I made in the past. And I think the big one that I want to start out with is, like, early on in my personal training career, when I was figuring things out as a new business owner, like literally within the first year of my business I'm talking about. And around that time, I was fresh out of football. I was still chasing that, heavy load, lifting heavy, big, just big lifts. I was really focused on heavy lifting, high intensity, high levels of performance. And it worked for a while. And my approach, by taking that, I was definitely under more so the category of like cross training. And I don't really like to call it CrossFit, because I did have structure and progression to my training. So I always like to call it cross training, because in a lot of, being quite honest, like in a lot of CrossFit environments, it's just all random. It's different every single time. And I know that a lot of the philosophy is like, challenging you in a different way each time, but like, we don't really ever get that progressive overload. We're never like allowing ourselves to, truly get better at an exercise and the skill of it over time if it's just constantly changing and it's constantly random. So I was doing a lot of that style where, I had a lot of Olympic lifts in the program, had a lot of lower body training in there, a lot of mixed modality conditioning pieces, a lot of high intensity conditioning, high intensity mixed modality conditioning. And again, like I said, this worked for a while until it didn't, until I was running myself into the ground, until, my hormones were tanking, especially my testosterone levels. My body was not recovering. Body composition started to change in a negative way. And so all of these things were coming because I was not regulating intensity. I was absolutely positively just redlining my body and my efforts. And like I said, it works initially, but at some point we start to get diminishing returns. And this was the first time where I was really like, okay, I can't just train at a high intensity all the time, unregulated. Like, there are ramifications for this. Like, I think, even during that time, it was crazy. I'm like literally in the first year of building out my business. I'm training clients while I'm training myself, like in between sessions. And I'm like going all out doing this cross training. And I was just smoked. Like, I was taking naps during the day. I was so tired. I had brain fog. Like, I could hardly concentrate. And it's literally because I was overtraining. I was doing way too much at way too high of an intensity, not supplementing enough with nutrition. I was in an extreme caloric deficit. And I looked really good and I looked shredded, but I felt like shit. And then even after I achieved some of those physical goals and those aesthetic goals, that's when I was getting those diminishing returns. I was noticing like inflammation in my body. And that's what's so fascinating. I was talking about this with my wife yesterday, Christina, and she coaches a lot of women, and she sees this even more predominantly just because they're a little bit more complex hormonally. But it is insane, like, for most of us. And this is why I'm glad, honestly, that I'm not, one of those just like kind of genetically gifted freaks, because I understand these things. Like, just like some of these struggles you guys face, I struggle with them, same struggles myself. And it's just wild how like this stress response is like very evident, like in my body, especially, and in body composition. And what I mean by that is like, it's not like you're like putting on fat mass, but you look puffy, inflamed in certain areas of the body when you're overtraining and you're too stressed. It's almost kind of gives off that like skinny fat look almost, where you're like, you just have like excess, it looks like excess body fat, but it's really just inflammation. It's your body's stress response to the overtraining. And that's something, like I said, I had to really learn the hard way by going there, messing myself up, being too fatigued to like barely even function, kind of wrecking my hormone health and how I was looking and feeling, to learn that lesson. Kind of like I said at the beginning of this, where I was like, sometimes us guys, we're stubborn and we got to go there to learn the lesson ourselves. So I hope that you guys, again, don't take yourself there, because it's just not necessary. And once again, it goes back to what I said earlier in the episode, where a lot of us, just in general, are conditioned to believe that more equals better. And I would argue the complete contrary, especially as we get older. Less is better. Less is more. More intentionality with less is better. And that's really the key with having a structured plan, having a structured approach to your training, is you're going to be able to get more with less. A lot of people who are doing random stuff, working out 5, 6, 7 days a week, look the exact same, feel the exact same, no change, because the quality isn't there. The intentionality isn't there. But if we can do, 2 or 3 days at an extremely high intentionality, and with a lot of focus and a lot of attention to detail, we could arguably get more from those 2 to 3 sessions. And I see this with clients than we otherwise were getting with those 5, 6, 7 each week. More intentionality equals more quality, which equals better results. When it's random, results are random, feedback is random, evidence is random. And so, when it comes to this concept as well with like overtraining and pushing too hard, some other mistakes that I've made, especially under the realm of running. And this one like really fascinates me, because I talk to a lot of people about running. I talk to friends, I talk to clients, I talk to potential clients, people online about running. And a lot of people have pain with running. A lot of people, their knee hurts, their hip hurts, their Achilles hurts. That happened to me, but I learned a really valuable lesson that 9 times out of 10, when we start to feel like just like pain, not like an injury, but like we start to feel pain in one of those areas of the body, that is our body's natural response telling us, I think you're doing a little bit too much too fast. And if we just listen instead of letting the ego take over and push through, all it takes is a simple regression, pull back the intensity or the volume, let that area of the body heal and recover, and then we can progress back. But where a lot of us get into the trap is when those things happen, we don't listen to the body, we push through, and then that leads to an injury. So if we can listen to those responses and those physiological responses in the body of pain, we will be able to get ahead of injury, and we will be able to regulate the body's recovery and its ability to adapt to that training stimulus to begin with. And I'm going to go back to it a bunch of times in this episode, but we're only getting the gains from what we can recover from. If we're just constantly overtraining and we're trashed, we're not getting those gains. We're not getting those adaptations. So we got to be smart, and we got to bring that smart approach into our training. And so this happened to me coming off of my my second half marathon, where this was in Columbus, and all the training kind of after that, my Achilles was just like, really bothering me. It started to really bother me, and I was battling against it. And I'm like, I just need to let this thing heal. Like, this is something I know, and Achilles is so touchy. And if I push through and I keep, running myself into the ground and like driving this running intensity high and the volume high, there's going to be ramifications for it. And thank God I took that approach, because all it took was me just pulling back on running. I actually focused on doing more cardio and zone 2 cardio on the ski erg. So many of you know what the ski erg is. Your flat foot, no ankle flexion extension, so we don't have any Achilles stimulation happening. We're flat foot. It's more posterior dominant, upper body kind of conditioning modality and machine. And so really good way to continue building that aerobic capacity and conditioning, but taking stress off of my Achilles. Did so, healed, recovered. I feel 100% now, haven't had an issue since, because I listened to my body. But if we push through that pain and we don't listen to that feedback, that's where we get injured. And then that's where we'll have to really sit out or get a surgery potentially. So I'm telling you guys, if you just listen to your body, which us dudes are absolutely horrible at. So this is a test to you dudes out there. If you can get better at that, I'm telling you, you guys will drastically decrease the amount of pain you have on your body. And it is give and take. I'm not kidding you guys. When it comes to training, it is push and pull. You cannot push and never pull back. We have to allow the body to regulate and to recover. And we have to be smart about that. And, I think for me in that moment where if I wouldn't have known the things I know about training and about exercise science, when that pain came about, it would have been really easy for me to just push through and just be like, I'm going to ignore that for the sake of performance, for the sake of my ego. But I listened. And because I listened, I'm 100% pain free. I don't have an injury. I'm able to run really legit mileage, lift hard, and I'm not in pain. I'm never injured. And I've talked about this on the podcast in the past. If you guys can put your body first, you can do the exact same thing. When I'm lifting, I never even allow myself to get to a point where I'm like, I'm gonna sacrifice some form and technique here just to hit that weight or hit that load. I don't ever even go there. I always prioritize range of motion. So am I taking this load through the exercise's full range of motion? Am I feeling this exercise in the targeted muscle tissue? If I'm doing a lat pull down, I need to feel that in the lats. I shouldn't feel it in my shoulders and my delts from overcompensating and rolling those shoulders forward, which are just overcompensating for the lats. I also use tempo and control. So I control the weight. I make sure that I'm creating tension in the muscle fibers and in the muscle tissue. And if I can do all of those things and I can check all of those boxes with the weight I'm using and the targeted reps that I'm hitting, I'll go up in weight. And then if I go up in that weight and any of those three things start to get sacrificed, I go back down because it's just not worth it. Honestly, I would argue too, because when we were athletes, we trained like idiots and it was just all out high intensity training all the time, heavy lifting, 1 rep maxing, like 2 rep, 3 rep maxes, like super heavy loading a lot of the time. And over time, the body just starts to really beat down and it really starts to get diminishing returns. And we have to have that give and take with the body. And we really do have to be mindful of just that overall training intensity and load that we're putting on the body, because we don't want to keep grinding ourselves into the ground. We want to be able to do this sustainably over time. And it's never worth hitting a weight for the sake of hitting it and then our body pays for it. Even for athletes and stuff, kind of going back to what I said about us training like idiots, it's like, even for athletes, it's like, could you imagine if you get hurt in the weight room, like you injure yourself in the weight room from ego lifting, and then you can't play in your competition or your sport? Like, it doesn't make sense. So why would we even remotely put ourselves in a position to like create a potential injury in the gym that could easily be avoided by just being more disciplined with the attention to detail? And that's what I think this industry, this fitness industry, this training industry severely lacks, is that attention to detail, is the focus of how are we actually performing the exercise? What is the movement quality like? What is the range of motion, the tempo? Are we actually feeling it in the targeted muscle tissue? It's the most the most underrated training principle is mind-muscle connection. Like if you're just sitting there doing an exercise and you're overcompensating from a different area of the body for the intended muscle, we're not even getting the benefits. So it's like mind-muscle connection is huge. It's like that's how we know we're using the right muscle to create this movement pattern to begin with. So it's like if that's negated, it's like the exercise is counterproductive. And that's something that I have found, being deep into this profession, is like those attention to details are my separator. That's why high level trainees want to work with me, is because I have that high level of attention to detail. I care about the little things. I know how those little things are actually big things. And elite level people respect that because they know they need it too. And they know that, that lack of it, and people are getting smarter and smarter about training, where like that lack of attention to detail is literally where we get hurt. It's literally where we get pain from lifting, which is like diabolical. The lifting should be letting us or making us feel better over time, not worse over time. It's just ridiculous. But that's kind of the mindset that especially a lot of us dudes possess when it comes to our training. And so I think a really good way to regulate this intensity and just be aware of how the body is responding to the training stress that you're taking on is honestly using fitness trackers. I think these are phenomenal for recovery data, stress data. HRV, heart rate variability, is a phenomenal measure of seeing the trend, not just like a day, like a within a day's recovery, but like your trend of recovery over time. And to make this really simple, when your guys' HRV is trending down, that means you're like really struggling to recover. When your HRV is, up, and usually your fitness tracker is going to have like a kind of like a green zone or an optimal zone that you want to kind of operate in. when that rises, when that HRV rises back into that zone, that means you're recovering. That means you're well recovered. Your body's adapting to the training stress that you're accumulating, and we're good to go. So that's a really easy way to utilize the HRV data, and it's like point blank accurate for me. Like when I'm feeling high stress, run down, just really feel like that brain fog and tired feeling, my HRV is like going to shit. And then like during those weeks and those days where I'm like, oh my God, I feel literally amazing, like super happy, energized, like not irritable at all. My HRV is like shooting up. So that's a really good key indicator that can help you guys when you are navigating just recovery in general. And then on top of that, like I think also just seeing like sleep data, seeing, what was the quality of sleep like. Quantity matters. 6 to 7 hours is money. If you can get a little bit more than that, even better. Some nights, I'm able to push into that 8 to 9. Like that's kind of my range. Like I would say on average, like even if I looked right now, it'd probably be around like 7 hours a night. On my like lower end, it's like 6, and then on the higher end, like 8 to 9. But I'd really try to stay in that sweet spot right at about 7. And I'm just one of those people where I feel the sleep directly. And I know some people say like, hey, I can operate off less sleep or whatnot. Like maybe I just know like I'm so in tune with this stuff by now that I'm like, if I don't get that like 7 to 8 hours, even when I dip into like 6, I feel tired the next day. And I'm in a world of awakening when I have kids eventually. So not yet, but when that happens, I know that's going to be a struggle with the sleep. So I really do, shout out to all the parents out there. I coach dads, and, you guys are badasses, man. Like you guys balance so much and have so much going on, so much responsibility. So I know I'm going to learn a lot. And already have learned a lot, from my dads in the Everyday Athlete program. But something that I think is really important too is like having a fallback and having a plan B when life does get busy, or you are really stressful, or you are really stressed, for example. I think like almost kind of having like a kind of pyramid of activity that you can kind of pivot to when you are in that stress state. So kind of how I like to do it is like, I'm regulating my training intensity week by week. So I usually like to gauge my resistance training intensity based on how close in proximity to failure I am on that given amount of targeted reps that I'm hitting on that lift. And so, I like to kind of weave between like, that 7 to like 10 RPE throughout my training blocks where, I'm starting around like RP 6, 7, and then I'm ramping up 8, 9, 10. So I'm increasing that load across, 4 to potentially 6 weeks if I'm progressing some of those exercises longer. And then bringing that intensity down and then ramping it back up. That's how I like to undulate my training intensity. That's how I undulate a lot of my clients' training intensity. But I will always override that if I'm feeling like really run down. So say it's a week I'm like planned, to do a high intensity workout or a high intensity lift, and I go into the day, I wake up, I'm like feeling like shit. I'm not just going to like power through and, add more stress. I'm going to still do that lift potentially, but I'm just going to regress the intensity and how hard and heavy I'm going on those planned exercises. That's a good fallback. And then if you're like really fatigued, really stressed, I'll just do some like really low intensity like cardio. And then from there, if I'm like really, really stressed, really fatigued, and I know I need a rest day, I'll just take the rest day and just do steps. So that's kind of like my order at which I'll approach activity, depending on the day and the stress, the recovery, the fatigue, all of those things that I'm always taking into consideration. And that's auto regulation at the end of the day. And I think that this just comes with training maturity. The longer you guys are in this game, the better you get at gauging, kind of how close in proximity to failure you are, or you're like your max on that exercise for that amount of reps. So even if you're doing like a 10 reps at failure, that's technically like a 10 rep max. So that's kind of how I like to gauge it. And on those lower intensity weeks or moderate intensity weeks, which is most of the time, I'm leaving that, 1 to 3 reps in reserve, kind of that RP 7 to 9. And then every now and then sparingly tapping into that RP 10. And honestly, nowadays, like I really like to just do it based on how I feel, where if it's a week, like I've been progressing well and like, it's a week I'm feeling really good, or a day I'm feeling really good, we'll push that loading a little bit. And then kind of vice versa on those days where, I need to give myself that recovery, I can easily pivot, auto-regulate, pick a lower intensity form of exercise, or pivot all the way to a rest day if needed. So, that's kind of how I look at my weeks, where I've got like my 5 days, my 3 full body lifts, my 2 conditioning days, and then I have 7 days to do those. And so I get to be a little bit strategic on where I place those rest days. And this might be helpful for some of you guys out there that are really busy and have a lot going on. I actually find like it's really beneficial for me to throw my rest days during the week, because those are usually my like really high stress days from work and life, where it's going to be harder for me to get like a really higher intensity session or even just like a moderate intensity session during some of those days. So I actually like to throw in my rest days during the weekdays, and then I like to do some of my activity over the weekends. Naturally, my calorie expenditure is like a little bit higher over the weekends, kind of depending on the situation. That feeds into kind of like the higher volume or higher intensity activity that I do over the weekend. I typically do my long run on Sunday, and I'll do like one of my full body lifts on Saturday, utilizing, those weekdays for my rest days when I'm at my basically highest stressed state. And so the biggest thing that I want you guys to really take away from this conversation is that you can't max out and go all out max effort on your conditioning and running and you're lifting simultaneously. Like, something has to give. That's why I think for a lot of you guys that do like a lot of recreational running or just utilizing running as a means of good cardiovascular stimulus and good cardiovascular benefits and calorie expenditure, I think it'd be really beneficial for you guys to look at like your lifts as like your higher intensity, and then those runs could be your lower intensity, where, if you weave those runs in even around those lifts, you could do them at a lower intensity to maximize recovery, still do the volume and the running alongside the lifting, or vice versa. And this is something that I really wanted to talk about in this episode, is depending on like what competition you're training for. So this will really help for a lot of you high rocks athletes out there, where this is kind of how I approach it with my clients, even where, most of the time the training is what's kind of taking the front seat intensity wise. The cardiovascular stimulus is kind of what's our lower intensity activity for the week. And then as we get closer to competition, within reason, because you still want to be able to taper leading into the competition. But as we get closer to high rocks, we can slowly start to shift where those lifts become more like maintenance style lifts, more sticking in that like 2, 3, 4 reps in reserve, kind of like that RP 6 to 8 range. And then we're really pushing the intensity and the anaerobic nature of the conditioning and the cardio. And that's a really good way to lead into competition where you're not stopping your lifts. Cause I think what a lot of people do is like, they get almost like so all into like a high rocks competition or something like that, and they negate all strength. And it's like, I have clients who tell me, they're like, dude, like one of my marathon guys, he's like, dude, I need that strength training for my hips, my knees, my ankles, because if you do it the right way, going back to what I said even earlier, you're not sacrificing your body to hit a load. You're actually listening to the body and working with it. You're not only getting stronger and building muscle, you're rehabilitating your body. That's the key and benefit of smart training. It can literally rehab your body in real time. And that's what I'm trying to expose more people to, because especially us dudes have this horrible negative connotation where we think like all lifting beats your body down. And it's just because people who think that, they've only lifted in a way that beats their body down. They've never even been exposed to this approach that I'm talking about. And I think it's such a breath of fresh air for a lot of my clients, and especially some of my recent in-person clients, that played football at Ohio State, who are locally in Columbus. Like, it's just such a breath of fresh air. And it's like, dude, this is how training should be. But we get so caught up in the ego and high intensity all the time, heavier weight, heavier weight, heavier weight. We get so focused on all this shit that we actually are like missing what matters absolutely most, which is, can we even recover from what we're doing at the end of the day? And so I think if you guys can really plan your week where you do have strategic high intensity days, strategic low intensity days, it'll be a game changer for your recoverability. Because one of the biggest mistakes that I made as I started getting into more of the hybrid style of training was doing my 3 lifts and 3 runs. I don't know how the hell some of these hybrid athletes, unless they're on drugs, are doing like all of these runs each week. Maybe they really did adapt to that level, but like, dude, when I was doing 3 lifts, 3 runs a week, I could not recover at all. So I literally went all the way back to my 3 lifts, my 1 run a week. And I'm just like, I'm going to focus on quality within that run. And I'm going to let myself rest on these other days of the week. And my body started picking up. I started feeling good, started to recover well. That's when I layered in that second day. Body started recovering well. Balancing the 5 days became sustainable. Make sure you guys can recover from what you're doing. If you're not recovering from what you're doing, it is counterproductive. You are overtraining and you're not getting the adaptation and the benefit that you're trying to get from doing the activity in the first place. So prioritize recovery, stress management, volume, and load management. It is literally the difference in your success with some of these competitions or not, and your success with feeling really freaking good when you're training or not. And it literally comes down to the attention to detail of how you're training. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, because it's so overlooked. I feel like it was overlooked my entire time training as an athlete, where like nobody really taught me that high level of attention to detail. It was all about how much weight, how much weight? Did you hit that PR? Did you hit that weight? And it's like, if we hit that weight, but we can't, like if we're squatting 500 pounds, but we can't walk up and down the stairs, like something's a little off. And that's just something I would encourage you guys to think about as you're navigating your training. And so I really just want to close out, with 4 main points that I want to leave you guys with: inputs over outcomes, seasons of training, zone 2 humility, especially for you high performers out there, and then longevity and making this work for you long term. And so when I'm talking about inputs over outcomes, this is everything, guys, because so many dudes especially go into the gym and ego lift. And I'm a firm believer that ego lifting is a byproduct of chasing short-term satisfaction in the moment and not trusting in a long-term progressive plan. Because if you trusted in a long-term progressive plan or had a longer-term progressive plan, you would be allowing the body to adapt to that lift over time. Guys get hurt, people get hurt in the gym because they don't have progression. They don't have progressive overload. They're never allowing the body a chance to adapt to the stimulus that they're putting on it. They are chasing a weight or a pace, a mile pace, just to chase it because they think they have to hit that. One of the biggest mistakes you guys can make with running is looking at your favorite quote unquote running influencer and trying to hit the same pace as them. That is the quickest way to burn the hell out from running. Run your own race, run your own pace. So I'm telling you guys, the more that you can graduate from the ideology that I have to hit this weight, I have to hit this mile time, the sooner you can eliminate that, the more enjoyable all of this will become. Because then you'll actually start working with your body again instead of forcing it to try to hit a number or a pace arbitrarily. Because this is the irony. If you drop the ego, if we regress, going back to what I said at the very beginning of this episode, talking about regression, you lower that barrier and you allow the body a chance to get in to that progression. Then over weeks, your body is adapting to that load. And ironically, you're going to reach that PR still, but you're going to feel damn good doing it because you actually allowed the body to progress instead of chasing a short-term result in a single session. And I think that's the biggest thing that people struggle with is they're chasing a result with one meal, with one workout. They're looking very short-term where it's like, I got to eat this one meal to get shredded. I got to do this one workout to lose fat. Slow down, pull back. What are we doing over time? That is what matters most, is not what we're doing in the moment. What matters most is what we're doing over time and how those efforts are either compounding for us or against us. And this goes back to that whole piece I said earlier, which is why I think following a plan, following a training program is a complete and utter cheat code, because it's literally allowing your body to adapt to the stimulus over time, and your body will be ready for the load and it won't be hurt and in pain. But the more we attack trying to hit a PR or short-term satisfaction in one single session, the more we're going to be in pain, the more injury is going to arise. Progressive overload is a cheat code that unfortunately not many people respect, because there's so many people out there just doing random workouts all the time. And I'm telling you guys, one of my buddies, it's a good little story to throw in here. One of my buddies who, he was a lacrosse player, Division I lacrosse player at Ohio State, one of my best friends. He, when he got done playing, he got really into bodybuilding and was really focused on, basically every time he'd go in the gym, he would just do a body part. He would train it till failure. So not a whole lot of structure or cohesion or progression. Just go in, hammer the muscle tissue for that targeted muscle that day, and then on to the next muscle the next day, and rinse, wash, repeat. Body started feeling like shit. He was not seeing progress at one point. And then I told him, I was like, dude, and I did give him a little bit more structure, with his training plan and what exercises to utilize and how to be more well-rounded. So I gave him that. But then on top of that, I was like, dude, just follow this for 2 weeks. Literally just repeat for the first time in this whole time post-athlete career. For the first time, dude, just give yourself the opportunity to progress what you're doing for at least 2 weeks. Please, just to see. And they literally texted me in week 2. He's like, dude, oh my God, I feel so much stronger. My body feels so much better lifting so much heavier weight, and I feel so much better doing it. All the shit that I just talked about, because he actually progressively overloaded. And I know what a lot of you are thinking, especially some of you guys that have followed a structured plan or program. And this is going to be, kind of a why behind why I program in the way that I do. But if you followed a program in the past, it's super easy to get into the mindset that like, I got to repeat the same exercises for, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, an entire year, for it to be effective. And so, I like to kind of meet in the middle of this where, I like to do essentially like my standard is doing 4-week training blocks where, essentially we're following the same exercises for a minimum of 4 weeks to give you that progressive overload, allow the body to adapt to those exercises, those skills, those movement patterns over the course of 4 weeks. And then after that 4 weeks, we can swap some of those exercise variations that we're utilizing. So for example, like if we were doing a flat dumbbell bench, on one of the days, in the first block, on that next block, we could easily throw in or progress into like an incline bench press from that flat bench press. We're still hitting the pecs, we're still progressing the tissue, but we're just changing the variation that we're utilizing to just keep it a little bit fun, keep it fresh, keep it different. And then, always we can go back to longer progression than that. I have some clients where they're like, dude, I'm really finding, a good groove with these exercises you've got. Let's follow this for 5, 6, 8 weeks. So we always have that option to take these exercises and progress them longer. I just think that that 4-week block method is really beneficial for people who just want more variation, but don't want to sacrifice progressive overload. Because I'm telling you guys, in this day and age, you basically have like two ends of the spectrum where it's either like random as hell fitness, where the workouts are literally changing every single time you go work out. And then you have like the opposite extreme where it's like you're following the exact same stuff every week for years on end with no change. Those are kind of the two ends of the spectrum. And I like to kind of operate in that middle ground where, we are getting that progressive overload, but we're also getting a little bit of that variation, and we're able to work different skills, and we're able to refine other skills and keep ourselves diverse. And ironically, what I've found doing this with a lot of clients is they end up getting stronger like on those main lifts anyway. Like when we, utilize like a different variation for a little bit, like for example, like a single leg deadlift, and then we come back to a deadlift, like they feel better, they feel stronger, more muscles are getting recruited and firing at the same time. They just feel better and more competent on the main compound lift. So it's just ironic that like through this process and actually using different variations ends up helping you on those main lifts and some of the main exercises that you guys are going to do. So I think that that's just really beneficial, especially if you're someone out there where you're like, damn, everything Zach's saying is like really resonating with me. I know I have to at least get some progression going. So I would encourage you guys, like no matter what split you're following, like even whatever you're doing, like literally just do me the favor of like progress it for 2 to 4 weeks and just see what happens. And I guarantee you guys will be shocked and you'll feel so much better. And so I just think that that is like so underrated, is focusing on those inputs over outputs. And then, I kind of talked about this briefly in the episode, but just understanding those seasons of training. Like if it's a big competition block for like a marathon or half marathon or, a high rocks competition, like some of that conditioning at some point is going to have to take the front seat. And then, the lifting can just become a little bit like lower to moderate intensity days. And then that conditioning can become our high intensity days, kind of flip flopping from our standard. And I just think like having that ability to know like what kind of season of life you're in or what, training wise, what you're focused on can just really help you get more out of it as you're navigating everyday training and competition-based training. And so on top of that, I think this whole idea of zone 2 humility is so huge, because this is something I had to learn the hard way. I joke about this with my clients, but kind of going back to the beginning, I always was just a short distance, more explosive based runner and athlete. And so I didn't honestly even have experience running long distances and understanding like what that feels like. What does a 11-minute pace feel like compared to a 7-minute pace? I didn't even have any bearing for that. So for me, like early on, I was doing way too intense runs. Like all of my runs that I wanted to be in like zone 2 were probably like zone 3, zone 4. And I should have been in zone 2. So since obviously failing through that, which is a theme of a lot of these lessons that I've learned, I was able to really gain the skill of how to regulate intensity based on pacing. And that's where I really started to get into more of like strict zone 2. And I'm telling you guys, if you're someone that struggles with this, just like go at a pace that feels like almost laughable to you. Like you're like, I feel like I'm pitter pattering, like I'm barely even jogging. Even if it's like an 11, 12, 13, whatever minute pace, I do not care. Like just lower that barrier of entry for yourself. build that endurance at that lower speed, because that is what literally builds your ability to go faster. Like that's what's so counterproductive about like when you are a distance-based runner doing the high intensity runs is like you're getting the adaptation of your aerobic capacity through the low intensity runs. You're building your ability to run faster and further in your aerobic runs, not in the high intensity runs. And that is a key point to learn through this process, because then you'll just trust in the easy runs more. You'll be like, okay, this is exactly why I'm doing it. And again, so many of these lessons are just themes across the board with these podcasts, but like that's why the why is so important, because like when you guys get it, when you know why you're doing it, like you're going to be so much more motivated to do it. Like if you don't understand, and I think that's what's sad is like a lot of people don't want to understand. They're like, just tell me what to do. Or like, like I don't want to have to know this or whatever. But it's like you're just hurting yourself by doing that. Like if you know the why, that's why I love all of my clients are very like they're sponges. Like they want to know the why. I absolutely love it. Because I know that if they understand the why, they're going to be that much more motivated to follow through. And a lot of the people who don't understand why they're doing what they're doing are the exact ones that lose motivation and fall off. And I see that as a coach and a trainer. So that's why I think it is extremely valuable to learn that why and know why you're doing the things that you're doing. And so I'm fully embracing those zone 2 runs, and it's insane. Like, my zone 2 runs started out probably like 10, 11 minutes, mostly like even in that 11-minute zone. And because I've been disciplined with like letting that intensity take a back seat and really focusing on lower intensity, easy runs, that pace is now picking up, and I'm running like, 9:30. I was even breaking 9 minutes into like that 8:50 zone or 8:50, kind of, realm, and still keeping the heart rate in zone 2. So that is truly how you guys build that aerobic capacity. It's not through those, big, hard runs. And that's just where we got to keep the ego in check. And this really just plays into this whole idea of longevity. And this is what I really want to end with you guys on, is just this idea of like thinking about long-term. It goes back to, what I was kind of saying with focusing on how our workouts and training is progressing over time instead of looking at it like session by session. Because if you can take that forward view and really focus on, are these things benefiting me long term, it'll drastically decrease like a lot of the ego lifting and shortcuts that you take in the moment or in a single session, because you know that, and you can trust in your efforts compounding over time, and it's working for you. So just trust in the fact that, those decisions are going to be predicated off of where you're ultimately trying to go. And I think that, a lot of this just comes down to how we train, how we age, the quality of it. And I just wish more people understood this, because I get to see it with my, mid 60 going on 70-year-old parents. Like, they are feeling so much better. Their quality of life is better, all because we have a consistent, well-polished, smart training plan for them that doesn't beat their body down. It actually builds them back up. And then they are highly motivated to keep doing it with me, because that ROI is there. And so a lot of these principles I taught you guys in this episode is for longevity, is for you to be able to do these things, lift, run, condition for the rest of your lives. And that's how I train a lot of my clients with that mindset, where we're doing things now that are paving a foundation for our future in our 30s, our 40s, our 50s, our 60s, and beyond. And if we take that approach, we can have a badass future, and we can age really freaking well. And at the end of the day, that's the goal, guys, is like, I don't want to be, just doing some high rocks competitions now. I don't want to just be like lifting and running right now. I want to be able to lift, run, condition for literally the rest of my life and feel damn good doing so. And if you guys adopt some of those principles, putting the body first, regulating intensity, regulating load, managing volume, load, all of those details, that's how you ultimately build a body that stands the test of time. And I'm telling you guys, this is the whole theory, and focus behind a lot of my training philosophy, is to help people become exposed to this style of training, not training that constantly beats your body down. You're constantly injured. You're constantly in pain. You're constantly having to take time off. Rarely, like none of my clients are rarely ever hurt, ever in pain. Same thing with me. And I told you guys that on a past episode, because I take that approach. So, know that you guys are not stuck. This whole process is dynamic. I think a lot of us humans think that like things are just like the way they are. Like, oh, if I'm like unfit, I'm just always unfit. Or if like I was always unhealthy, I'm just always unhealthy. Or if like I've gained a bunch of weight, like I'm just always going to be that. This shit's dynamic. You guys always have the ability to change how you're progressing over time and where you're headed by the inputs and how you handle and take care of your body today and every day, every week, and that effort compounds over time. So, take these principles with you guys. I know I absolutely love training this way. I enjoy training, doing my lifting with my running, with my conditioning. I feel like I'll always have this balance for the rest of my life, even as it evolves, regresses, progresses over time. It's always going to be, this approach. And I know a lot of you guys love to train this way. So I'm really hoping you guys can take these lessons that you learn from this episode, take them with you in your own running, your own lifting, your own conditioning, and just really excel at the end of the day. Like, that's what I want for you guys, is like to truly excel, feel phenomenal doing so. Because I know for me, for a long time, as an athlete that came from an ego lifting based mindset and weight room culture, I thought that was just normal. Being in pain, feeling like shit, just normal. But it took me getting deep into this and learning the right way to realize, like, training done the right way should 1000% build your body up and make you feel even better, not worse. And if it is making you feel worse, that approach needs to change. So as always, if you guys need anything at all, hit me up. You can message me on IG. You can just shoot me a message. Anything that you guys need or have questions with, reach out. I'm an open book. Would love to help you guys in any way that I can, and looking forward to the next episode. Thank you for tuning into the Everyday Athlete Podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and drop a comment. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, be sure to follow the show, leave a quick review. It helps more athletes like you find this message. And if this episode resonated with you, share it with a friend or post it to your story and tag me. I'd love to hear what stood out to you personally. So keep evolving, keep showing up, and keep living like an everyday athlete.